As you are finding your seats, please be sure to silence your cell phones. Now before we move on to our featured presentation, Marvel vs. DC It Ends Here, Part 7, we will hear a special word from a local indie director, Jaden, about a short film. Matthew Lowe passed through a hole no wider than a CD case. Vesna Vulovic fell 6.3 miles from a plane. Violet Jessop stared death in the eye on 3 separate occasions on the high seas. Each of these stories individually are as equally terrifying as amazing. But what's absolutely astounding is that each and every one of these persons lived. Matthew's story is probably the shortest I'll have out of the 3, but in my opinion, it is the most gruesome. Be advised by that, because it's bad. On a day in December 2008, Matthew was doing his regular old kiss the partner goodbye, give a little noogie to the kiddo there, off to work, to do business as normal. Matthew worked at an engineering factory. It's actually called Compass Engineering. The factory he worked at, Compass Engineering, was located in Baru, UK? I don't know. Baru? Hullabaloo? You get it. He would be in charge of a computer program, like lead conveyor belt, drove these steel beams through these conveyor belt. I'm repeating myself. Metal here, metal go there, in conveyor belt. Boom, caveman. As Matthew was walking around the shop along the conveyor belt that he was in charge of, he actually felt a tug on his overalls, and he started getting sucked in backwards on this conveyor belt, the machine. Matthew immediately knew what was going to happen. He knew that he was going to fit through this horribly tiny space. It was actually measured, it's 5 inches. Like I said before, Matthew knew that he was, probably going to die. So it's probably not going to be the best day of his life. As Matthew was getting sucked in, he told himself, just, hold on, I got like an eye booger. It's really in there. Okay. You were good. As he was getting sucked into the machine, he told himself, you need to stay calm, bro. Like, just chill out. Like, you're gonna be fine. The worst case scenario, you get turned into a pile of human Play-Doh. The best case scenario is, like, you get turned into Play-Doh, but you live. Not that much of a difference. And he said in an interview that while he was getting sucked in, he was calm, cool, collected. He thought about his partner, and especially his daughter, that he had to live through this to be there for especially his daughter. So he had to be there for her. So as Matthew was getting sucked in, just imagine here with me that I actually couldn't afford like production value. So just imagine that. Imagining? Okay, good. So imagine that Matthew, he enters the machine sideways, okay, and like there's like this nice like CGI 3D of Matthew, right? And he's getting sucked into the machine that's no wider than a CD case, so no bigger than 5 inches. His head actually fit through the biggest gap, but yeah, so picture that. Keep that in mind while I show you what I actually did. So here's Matthew, this young chap right here. So as you could tell, it's not his happiest day. I can imagine it probably isn't. His head actually fit through a bigger section, which actually saved his life. And like I mentioned, he didn't get sucked in like head first. It was like his side of his body first. His neck down is what got scramblized through the machine, through those 5 inches. So neat. Yeah, safe to say it was probably not Matthew's best day of his life. It was probably his worst, getting turned into Play-Doh. I don't think that's the top of anyone's list. Certainly not mine. Matthew, obviously his worst part of his day was this. Thinking about my life, the worst part of my day recently was that I ate my lunch at like 9:38 in the morning, and I went the rest of the day pretty hungry. So different but similar. his is way worse. While Matthew was going through the machine, he actually heard cracking sound. That was his right arm getting like mangled up in the machine and just absolutely getting shattered, just wrecked. And so after the whole machine, slurped him up and then just spat him out, and after he was all spaghettified, no one was in that part of the section of the factory. Also during this, he wasn't feeling anything and that he was conscious. Some sites say he blacked out. He did not. Yeah, he was fully conscious for that. And when he got spat out of the machine, he started screaming because his adrenaline calmed down. He actually could feel like everything that happened to him, and he was still alive. So I just want to let you know about that too. If you didn't get that, he's screaming and stuff. Two co-workers came by, saw what happened to him, and they're like, okay, well, we need to get emergency services here. So they got them. They drove him to the hospital, and his partner, she came to the hospital, and the doctors were like, look, like, we'll try everything we can, but I mean, like, this guy's like mashed potatoes right now. Like, it doesn't look good, especially his right arm and like his two hip bones. He broke his right arm, he fractured his ribs, actually ruptured his stomach, and I think it was his bowels. Yes, that's true. And then pelvis was also broken. Top it off, Matthew only spent a month in the hospital. He did have 6 operations though. Most of them were just pinning his bones back together, so because they were just shattered, obviously. After that, pretty much healed up fine. His right arm is a lot more weak, and he has like a sick, gnarly scar that goes up like the majority of it. But besides his right arm feeling weak, mostly has like mental trauma from that. I mean, obviously, that's, I think, the longest lasting consequence from this whole ordeal is that he has like panic attacks. I mean, who wouldn't? So I made an error also. His right arm had some issues, but his left hip also. Matthew was transferred to Barnsley hospital there. That was actually the first place he was hospitalized in, was Barnsley. That's where the 2 co-workers took him, or the medical emergency staff. Later, he would get transferred to Sheffield. Make of it as you will. And that's where, after the majority of the time, he would be released. He would actually go back to work to the same company, the same people, same ownership, everything. So, I mean, the gonads on him, right? Your work like literally turns you into human Play-Doh, and you're like, what's up? I'm back. So like any, ordeal with like safety, companies get sued. It's a normal. It ain't the world if no one's ain't getting sued, right? Kaltenbach, which is the company behind like the actual machine that Matthew got slurped in, they would get fined £16,000 for damages. That's not enough. Anyway, Compass Engineering also got laid out in court too, where they had to pay £24,000. But I mean, again, like, it's just a slap on the wrist for the company. They both were like, yeah, safety's a huge concern. We don't want people getting like turned into mush in our machines. We can't have that. They would also pay an additional £55,000. Matthew would still be working for Compass Engineering. He said that he's a living example of that companies need to be in charge of safety. So he's there to kind of make sure everything's safe and be that guide, I guess. So that's Matthew's story. Vesna Vulovic was someone in their early years who loved to travel. I mean, who doesn't, right? She would say in an interview that she would go to London, France, and she would go to, actually, after she graduated school, she would go to Sweden. So after that, she had this fantasy and dream of just loving to travel, which is a very popular dream that a lot of people have. When she returned from Sweden back to her parents, she would actually notice one of her friends was wearing a air hostess outfit for Flight JAT. Flight JAT, what the friend was wearing was the branding of the sort of flight company that they have. Vesna would also say, what the heck, right? Why can't I want to be that. So she would become an air hostess, and it wouldn't be no later than 8 months is when she experienced this absolutely horrifying event in her life. Vesna would board flight 367 on January 26, 1972. She would board when the plane was on its first layover. The final destination was Croatia, leaving from Sweden. Now, she would board on that first layover at Copenhagen, Denmark. This is where she would have her terrible tale unfold. Okay, so I made a critical error while researching The starting destination was in Stockholm, Sweden. Okay. Now the end destination was Belgrade, Serbia, and the whole Croatia. That was the second layover that they never got to. But the first layover where Vesna boarded, that was in Copenhagen, Denmark. So continue. The DC-9 plane would take off at around 3:15 p.m. and not even like an hour into, I think it was like 45 minutes. 46 minutes into the flight is when an explosion happened. They said that the explosion happened in the baggage compartment. Because of the explosion, the plane broke into 3 separate distinct parts. I will now reenact the bombing that happened on the plane and what happened with Vesna the best way that I know how. It's with Lego. It's with Lego. Just let you know. Lego. Okay, so here we have the representation of Flight 367. It's a Star Wars ship, I know. Calm down. We're pretending here, okay? Okay, so what we're gonna do, because the anatomy of this is so different than the BC-9 plane that Vesna crashed in, this is going to be the front, and this is going to be the middle section and towards the back end. Okay, awesome, great, glad we agree. Okay, so Vesna in this occasion is going to be little Grogito over here, little Grogu. Okay, now that we established the boundaries, I did the liberty of taking away the weapons for everyone. You know, guys, gotta keep it realistic here. No weapons on a plane, right? So what happened? Explosion happened over the baggage compartment. Now it said that 19 people were sucked out almost immediately. So we're gonna take boom, shebang. What happened with little Grogu Vesna over here, she would actually get pinned towards, she's in the back, towards the back of the plane. Remember, this is like the back of the plane. She would get pinned like right in between a food cart. So let's pretend this trash can is like a food cart, right? So it would pin itself against her, like against the plane. So in a hindsight, it actually helped her survive because it pinned her to that wall of the plane. Now, she's the only one who lived. Everyone else died. And when it did crash, it crashed in what is nowadays Czech Republic, but Czechoslovakia back then. It was said from the eyewitness that did save her that she had about half of her body inside the plane and half of it was outside, with one of her colleagues dead on top of her. Okay, now again, this isn't 100% accurate, but I like to think this is how it happened. Okay, sweet, awesome, let's go back. So like I mentioned before, the plane crashed in what is nowadays called the Czech Republic, but back then it was Czechoslovakia, and it was actually a town called Serbska? You guys get it. I don't know how to say it. I'm gonna put it on the somewhere on the video. You'll just read it for yourself. Google it, right? The explosion on the plane. The explosion on the plane, people said that is due to a terrorist attack, so that it was a bomb, like a briefcase bomb or anything like that, and that's what tore up the whole plane and caused a whole ordeal for Vesna and everyone. So the reason why people are saying that it was a bombing is because there was a group of ultra-nationalist terrorists in Croatia at the time, and after the bombing happened, one of the so-called members called the police station and said, I was responsible for the bombing and I am a terrorist nationalist, blah blah blah, yada yada. You get it. So that's why they believe that. Even though there were people who did commit these bombings and that were these nationalist terrorists, no one was arrested for any of the bombings. There was also bombings like on a train and stuff like that, but no one was arrested. Vesna actually holds the world record for longest fall without a parachute. People might say, oh, it doesn't really count because she was, in a plane while she was falling, so the plane kind of covered her crash, softened the blow. But if you're falling 33,333 feet, you're probably gonna die. And the fact that she lived is just crazy enough, So I think we should all just give her a pass on that, right? Let's just give her the good old participation award, give her the gold star. So that equivalates to 6.31 miles or 10,000 160 kilometers. Guys, I live in America. I don't know what kilometers are. Now, I did mention that she was saved by a person in the town. They actually came upon the wreck of the whole plane crash, and it just so happened to be that this man was a medic in World War II, and he was able to help Vesna survive long enough for actual like paramedics and to come and put her in a hospital, and she would make a full recovery overall. I mean, she did break almost every freaking bone in her body, as you would think, right? She did have a limp, I think it was in the right side of her leg, due to a twist in her spine that occurred from the accident. She also, what's the other horrible thing that happened to her? What's also crazy is that Vesna wasn't even supposed to be on this flight. She actually got mixed up with another person named Vesna. Our Vesna was the one that went on the plane instead of the other Vesna that was supposed to be on the plane. That's just crazy that she could have not even been in this accident because of just another person having the same name. Going back on everything that like bad happened to her besides, you know, living, because of the twisting of her spine, she would become temporarily paralyzed. She would end up in a coma for 3 days. But I mean, on top of that, there's like specifics on like what bones were fractured and what was broken. But I mean, like, you fell from 6.3 miles. We know like most of your body's gonna be broken. If you guys want the facts, just Google it. Come on, don't come to me. Witnesses say that Vesna's first words when she came to from her coma was, "Where are the cigarettes?" Just imagine, you know, you fall record-breaking height, and you know you're pretty much broken and battered. You already went through a couple surgeries. You wake up, the first thing you say is, "Mama needs her cigs." Right? Cough them up. I deserve them. She actually wouldn't remember really anything until a month after. So she wouldn't remember anything an hour before the flight. She said the last thing she remembered before the flight was passengers boarding the plane and that she was greeting them. She actually went on throughout the rest of her life. She didn't have a fear of flight because of this lack of memory of the horrible event that occurred. So pretty nice. I wish I could bottle up my trauma. Forget about it. Just deep down. Moving on. After about 10 months of recovery and rehabilitation, she would learn to walk again. And 16 months is when she was back in society. And she actually went back to the JAT flights, that brand of flight airliners. And she would ask for her old job back because, you know, she didn't care. She didn't have a memory of anything. So she was like, I want to go back and work. But they were like, no, because you're famous now. We don't want to risk that. You know, blah, blah, blah. We're kind of lame. And so they put her on a desk job, kind of arranging some other stuff. Yeah, she worked for that company for years and years later, which is crazy. I want to note though, she actually did quote, and I love this, is that they asked like what was her secret to, you know, her success of healing so quickly, because, you know, falling out of a plane took 16 months just to do that. That's absolutely insane. She said that it was a childhood diet of chocolate, spinach, and fish oil. So if that's what you want, then you better start chugging, right? Vesna would actually become a public icon because, I don't know, you know, just a little thing of just living. She was actually praised by the president of Yugoslavia at the time, which, you know, Serbia was part of Yugoslavia at the time. I don't want to get into it, but yeah. And so she was praised for that. There was even a song written about her called I forgot who we're talking about. There was even a song written about her called the Vesna Stjuardesa. She was actually awarded the Guinness World Record for longest fall without a parachute, and she was awarded it to her by Paul McCartney, and this took place in 1985. If you don't know who Paul McCartney is one of the members of the Beatles. At the tender age of 66, Vesna would pass away. She would pass away on December 16th, 2016. Violet Constance Jessop was born in 1887 in Argentina. When she was 16 years old, her father would get sick and pass away tragically. Because of this passing, her mom was like, "Hey, well, we need to move. We can't stay here." So they moved the whole family to the UK, Britain, England, you get it, over there. Her mother would actually become a stewardess on the boats over there. I think that's what this is just a personal theory of mine. I mean, like, obviously, like, her daughter is seeing her mother become a stewardess, and that's got to have some type of influence on her. That's what I feel like. Violet's mother would also become sick, and she wouldn't be able to work. That's how sick she got. So Violet kind of did the Uno reverse here, and she became the one that was the stewardess, and she actually started in 1908 with the Royal Mail Carriers, and that's when her whole seafaring adventure started. So she would do that for 2 years, and then 1910 she would join White Star Line. That's the company that's in charge of a couple ships, called the Olympic, the Britannic, and the Titanic. Listen up. Pay attention. I see you sleeping back there. Come on. Violet would personally work on each of these ships. Suspiciously enough, all of them would experience a devastating crash. If not that, then sink. Let's start off with the RMS Olympic. This is pretty recent into her seafaring career. So she started in 1908, and this is 3 years later on the 11th. 1911, pretty early on. She's only been doing this for about 3 years. The RMS Olympic would crash on September 20th, 1911. It was just like every other day, people were doing their thing. They didn't know they were gonna die probably, or get in a horrible crash. No one died from this accident, and that's what it was. It was an accident. They were leaving the harbor on this place called a Solent from the mainland of the UK. There's just this waterway that goes through. You can look at the picture. There's a picture. The RMS Olympic was actually ahead of another ship called the HMS Hawk. This is a warship that was designed to ram ships. Okay, it's what it's designed to do. What goes down is that the Olympic is ahead of the Hawk, and then the Olympic makes a turn starboard. It turns right. This took the Hawk by surprise because they didn't even do like a turn signal. They didn't do they're like, "Hey, bro, we turning, make way." That was a joke, right? Like, I'm pretty sure ships don't do turn signals. They might. I don't know anything about ships. So yeah, they turned so suddenly, and the Hawk didn't have any time to react. They just full on bulldozed the right back of the Olympic. The Hawk would suffer, like its whole bow would be absolutely destroyed. This was an entire accident, and the Royal British Navy would blame the Olympic for this whole ordeal, and rightfully so. Didn't even do anything to communicate that they were turning. So there's that. The Hawk would puncture 2 holes in the Olympic. One was punctured above sea level, one was below. One of the propellers on the Olympic was twisted, so it made it useless. The hole above sea level wasn't that big a concern. The hole below sea level was a massive concern for everyone on ship. That's common knowledge to know. You're going to take on water. It just depends if it's how deep, how fast the water is going to be pouring in. So for example, let's say a ship gets a 2-inch size hole just a foot below the water. That ship will gain about 78 gallons of water per minute. So if you're talking a mega gash, which the ship did get, it's going to bring in a lot of water very quickly. Because the damage that they both sustained, they docked and boarded and got repaired. So everything was fine. No one died in the accident. Okay, so one extremely important thing that I have to tell you is that Captain Edward Smith was in charge of the Olympic at this time. If you guys know anything about the Titanic, he was the captain of that ship. Before he had that beautiful travesty, he had this nice golden goose egg. Yeah, I don't know whose idea was it. Man, that guy, Captain Edward over there, yeah, he almost ruined the Olympic. We got the Titanic in the shop right now. Put him behind that wheel. Give him a good taste of the sea. Let it happen. I'll allow it. This was a big fat fail for the Olympic, thanks to Captain Edward Smith. It was probably a lot of other people, but I'm just going to blame him. The worst thing I would say that came out of this whole event was that people started to believe the hype. And what I mean by that is the White Star Line was already saying that their Atlantic-class cruisers were unsinkable. Due to this event happening, people were like, "Dang, okay, Betty. yeah, they can't sink. So that's probably the worst thing, is that the mentality and the hype behind these ships were idolizing that they can't sink, and then they won't sink. It's impossible. Stupid peons. Stop questioning us. We're White Star Line, idiots. They can't sink. The Olympic would actually get a propeller from the Titanic because the Titanic was in development, so to speak. It was being built. They were like, okay, well, we need to maximize our profits, so just take a piece of the propeller from the Titanic, give it to the Olympic, repair it, and then boom, ship that bad boy off, and we're good to go. It's pretty cool to think about. The Olympic as a little piece of Titanic. Violet would actually continue to work on the Olympic after it got repaired. It was soon before the Titanic became ready for its voyage and all that. A bunch of her co-workers were like, hey, we're gonna go sign up for the Titanic because, you know, the hype around it, it's gonna be this massive, huge hunk of just beauty. You should join up with us. So they kind of like were like, hey, sign up. And she's like, okay, yeah, you had me at hey. She signed up, moved over, transferred over to the Titanic. On April 14th, 1914, 24-year-old Violet Jessop was sleeping in her bed, or at least it mentions like she was in a room and she was getting ready for bed, if not sleeping. And that was when she was like throttled awake based on this like horrendous crash. It mentioned she was helping people get in the lifeboats. Soon later, she was like shoved a baby. So she took a baby, thrust onto lifeboat 16. I don't want to go into too much detail. I mean, you guys know, like, Titanic was horrible. Almost 1,500 people died. The majority of it was because they didn't even have a lot of lifeboats. Another fun fact, actually, is that when she like got rescued, she said with the baby still in her arms, some lady, like historical lady, like ran up, grabbed the baby, just ran it off. And she's like, well, hopefully that was her mom. Sounded like it was, because in Jessop's like later years in her life, she would get a phone call. This young lady was letting her know that she was that baby that she saved, and she never mentioned this story to anyone. She thinks it's real. The Britannic was made during like World War I times. Due to the times, the Britannic would never be used as a cruise ship. All the furniture and like the nice stuff inside of it was ripped out. It was placed as a medical ship. It was painted all white with a big fat red cross and a horizontal stripe along the ship. So it was meant for Atlantic. It was put in the Mediterranean, so completely opposite side of where it was built for. On the 21st of November 1916, near the island of Kia? It's near Greece. During the morning, the ship would be shaken with a massive explosion. Evidence points more towards a mine that was set by the German U-boats. The captain is said like he was asleep at the time, and he was the last one to leave the boat because he was still in his PJs. He rushed up to the main deck. He ordered full speed ahead just to kind of beach the ship. Ended up sinking before they even got there because it was taking on so much water. Told them to cut off the engines and just kind of let momentum kind of take its course. But in the whole of it, 28 to 30 people died. There was also an article that said 50 people died. Take it as it is, 28 to 50. Over 1,000 people were actually saved, and they actually overcompensated with lifeboats for this one. You know, they did another Uno reverse here, which is a good thing. Due to the structure of the Britannic, it was actually the largest ship to sink. It sank in 55 minutes, whereas the Titanic sank in like 2 hours and like 40 minutes. And as Violet was realizing all this was happening, she was actually stationed there as a nurse. She would jump out of the ship, but because the ship was sinking so fast, she jumped out, and the keel of the ship, which is like the bottom like fin, whacked her on the head as a good like final like kiss goodbye. I mean, surprisingly, after all these like horrible things, Violet just kept working. She worked until the 1950s, and it was until she was 65 when she decided to retire. In 1971, at the age of 86, she would pass away due to heart failure. But I mean, she lived a long time, and she worthily has the title of the unsinkable queen because she just absolutely just dominates every ship that she goes on. Like, she just can't drown. That's gonna do it for the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked it, please leave a comment of your favorite part. If you were forced to experience one of these stories, which one would you do and why? Write that in the comments below. But yeah, if you liked it, please leave a like, subscribe. I got some more plans coming out, and if you guys have any suggestions, please let me know. I love looking and like lurking. I love lurking for this stuff. It's really fascinating to me. I got another project on the way soon. It should definitely not take as long as it has for getting this one out. But thanks, guys.